Good evening, I'm Hugh Downs, and this is 2020.
On the ABC News Magazine 2020. Tonight, a special hour-long report on the death of Elvis Presley based on months of investigation by Geraldo Rivera. Elvis Presley, an idol to millions of Americans growing up in the 50s. Elvis the Pelvis, sexy and exciting, explosive with youthful energy. But then he became bloated and overweight, prematurely old at age 42. There were rumors about his health and habits. And then he was dead, the victim, we were told, of a fatal heart attack. Tonight, Geraldo Rivera tells a different story, the whole story of the death of Elvis Presley, based on confrontations with some people who didn't want to find out the truth, with some people who concealed it. He talked with doctors and friends of Elvis Presley who know why he died alone in a bathroom of his Memphis mansion. Tonight, Geraldo Rivera on the Elvis cover-up.
It's now 2 years since the death of Elvis Presley, a death that shocked millions of Americans who had grown up to the sound of his music and who spent millions of dollars buying his records, seeing his movies. 2 days ago, the news came from Nashville of a charge against Elvis Presley's personal physician, accused by the Tennessee State Board of Medical Examiners of indiscriminately prescribing uppers, downers, and pain-killing drugs that Elvis Presley consumed in large quantities. For months, Geraldo Rivera has been investigating this story, and because of its startling nature, we're devoting our entire hour tonight to Geraldo Rivera's special 2020 report on the man known as the king of rock and roll. Geraldo.
Thank you, Hugh. The king he was. Elvis Presley was a giant on America's cultural landscape, a man filled with passion and fire at a time when most of the rest of the country was sleepwalking through its cultural life. He didn't invent rock and roll. He just hand-carried it into the mainstream. Elvis Presley was different, and because he was good at it, it paid off. All 28 of his movies were moneymakers, and his records have sold somewhere between 700 and 800 million copies. That works out to roughly one Elvis Presley record for each family on the face of the earth. Despite the fact that hundreds of thousands of people worshipped him, the king demonstrated the fact of his mortality when he died at the age of 42. They told us of a heart attack. But did Elvis Presley really die of a heart attack? That's what this special edition of 2020 is all about.
The police came out and they filmed the show, so I couldn't move. I had to stand still. The only thing I moved was my little finger like that.
He was, of course, the first and greatest of the world's rock stars, and his death shocked the nation. The working-class hero, the hillbilly cat, was dead. And 2 years later, hundreds of thousands still mourn his passing. Sensitive, sensual, generous, talented, he had been living proof that the rags-to-riches American dream could still come true. Since his death, that memory has been tainted slightly by a smoldering controversy. Did Elvis really die of a heart attack? Or was he just another victim of self-destructive overindulgence?
I don't think he had a heart attack. That's what I'd like to believe, that he died from a heart attack.
I know he had a hard life. It would make no difference.
Everybody should be told the truth.
I've been thinking about that. I hope and pray that he didn't do it on purpose.
We know that at the time of his death, Elvis was no longer the slim, swivel-hip sex symbol he once was. As this videotape of his last concert clearly shows, by June of '77, 2 months before he died, Elvis seemed strained and swollen. But despite his apparent physical condition, he could still thrill his audience with the power of his voice and the strength of his personality.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like you to say hello to my girlfriend, Ginger. Ginger, stand up, honey. Sit down, Ginger. It's enough for her.
After Elvis died, were you told what he had died from?
Well, all of us had heard at the same time that it was a heart attack.
Do you believe in your own mind right now that that alone caused his death?
Right, in the very beginning, I did. I just, you know, I think it was Elvis's time to go. So I think he took him. But then again, in my mind, there are a lot of unanswered questions.
Our investigation of the death begins with a reconstruction of the last 12 hours of Elvis Presley's life. Like many people in show business, he and his entourage were night owls. Their days began after dark. About an hour before midnight on the night before he died, Elvis had a dentist appointment with a dentist named Lester Hoffman. Accompanied by his fiancée Ginger Alden, his cousin Billy Smith, and longtime friend Charlie Hodge, Elvis drove out of Graceland, his famous home in Memphis, Tennessee. The next day, August 16th, was the scheduled beginning of another concert tour, and Elvis wanted to get his teeth cleaned and 2 fillings replaced before he went out on the road.
We returned back to Graceland at about 1:30, and Elvis and I went upstairs, and Elvis turned on the television in his room to relax for a little while. Then Elvis started talking about his tour, and started talking about our wedding plans, and about announcing our engagement at his Memphis concert. Then it was about 4 o'clock, and I asked Elvis if he still wanted to play racquetball, which he had mentioned playing earlier, and he said yes. Elvis got in touch with Billy Smith, and Billy and his wife Jo came up at about 4:30. We went down to play racquetball. So Elvis really seemed like he was in a good mood. He played racquetball for a little while, and then went and played the piano. It was about 6 o'clock when we went back into Graceland. At about 6:30, Elvis called downstairs for Ricky Stanley to bring up his packet of medication to help him get to sleep, because he was so nervous about, he was always kind of keyed up for starting a tour. So Ricky brought it up. Elvis took his packet of medication and started reading a book on psychic energy then. He thought that would help him fall asleep. Then I fell asleep. So at about 8 o'clock, I woke up because Elvis was restless, saying that he just couldn't sleep. So he called downstairs for Ricky again, and Ricky came up and brought up another packet of medication.
A second packet?
Right. Elvis took that, and then I went back to sleep. The third time I was awakened again, Elvis was starting to get up, saying that he still couldn't sleep. He took the book on psychic energy with him, and he started toward the bathroom door. And I said, "No, don't fall asleep." And he turned and smiled at me and said, "Oh, okay, I won't." And then he went to the bathroom. I went back to sleep, and I slept until 2 o'clock. At that time, I rolled over and I looked at the clock, and it said 2 o'clock then, and the bathroom door was still shut. So at that time, I went in and I knocked on the door, and no one answered. So I opened the door, and that was when I saw Elvis.
According to an investigator for the medical examiner's office, the body was purple, or deep blue, and rigor mortis had already set in. Elvis had apparently been dead since early that morning. After a flurry of desperate activity, which may have included attempts at mouth-to-mouth resuscitation by members of the Presley staff, an ambulance arrived at Graceland. 2 paramedics from the Memphis Fire Department, Ulysses Jones and Charles Crosby, needed assistance from several of the aides even to lift Elvis onto their stretcher. He weighed between 250 and 255 pounds. The body was rushed to the Baptist Memorial Hospital, where an emergency resuscitation team, similar to the one shown here, worked in vain to revive Elvis. In a very short time, it became apparent the effort was useless. Even at that time, the authorities at least suspected that the death might be drug-related. Dan Warlick, the investigator from the medical examiner's office, received the news of the death from the police. The message to him read, EPOD DOA BMH. Elvis Presley, overdose ? Dead on arrival, Baptist Memorial Hospital.